Hello everybody. Welcome to the SiteGround webinar. My name is Elena and I'm part of SiteGround's marketing team. As the title reveals, today we're going to have a panel discussion with four amazing experts with lots of experience who will answer your questions regarding website planning, building, deploying website, and working with web developers. Cal Evans will lead the discussion today. Cal is a long-time PHP developer. He's been programming for over 36 years, and he's pretty much a legend in the PHP community. But before I give the word to Cal, I just wanted to remind you to add your questions via the Ask a Question button on the bottom of your screen so that the speakers can see them. And also, we're recording the whole webinar, and we will send the recording. We'll send the recording to you to the email you use to register. Before I give the word, I also wanted to tell you that you will be able to watch a replay right after the webinar is over here in Crowdcast. And now I'm gonna hide myself, focus on the chat, and give the word to Cal.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much. It is always my great honor to be here with my friends SiteGround, and this month they have allowed me to gather some of my other friends. One of the reoccurring themes that I've had in my career is building websites and dealing with. Somebody asked in the chat, are we going to dumb things down? Most of my clients are not dumb people. They are experts in their particular area, and I'm an expert in my area, and when we get together, we can build something great. So we're not going to dumb them down, but we're going to try to talk or answer these questions in a non-technical way so that people that do not live in our world can understand these. If we fail to do that, please call us on it, ask in the chat box. But before we get started, I'm going to ask everybody to give a brief introduction. We're going to start, we're just going to go around like the pictures are. So David, Michelle, and then Mario, why don't y'all introduce yourselves?
Okay, I'm David Bissett. I've been with WordPress for about 15 years. I do work for Enviro Gallery, which is a photo gallery plugin for WordPress. I also do independent consulting.
It's early.
Various other hobbies that now I've slapped out of me. So good morning.
That's a good way to start the day. Hi all, I'm Michelle. I have a design background, but I currently also do a whole lot of front-end development, specifically with WordPress. Been doing WordPress since about 2010. And in addition to that, I also do contract UX work with anywhere from small organizations to enterprise.
Very good. Mario?
Hey everyone, Mario Peshev here. I'm the CEO of Devrix. We are a team of 50 plus building high-scale WordPress projects. I've been a WordPress core contributor since 3.7, I believe, and I'm pretty excited to be here and help everyone out with the most common questions we also do receive during sales calls or emails or at webinars and whatnot. So thanks again for having me, and would be more than happy to help out as best as I can.
Excellent, excellent. And what Mario left out is that while I've known all of these people and seen them all in action helping people, Mario is the only one here that is actually one of my mentors. So Mario, it's good to see you again. It's been a while. Okay, let's kick off with the first question. I'm going to answer this one. In the chat, there were several very interesting questions that all revolve around what's the best plugin for X. There was also a couple of what's the best theme for Y. We're not going to answer that because invariably the answer to that question is always the same. It depends. Okay, that's not the focus for this. I would highly recommend it if you still have questions about that after this, that you contact one of these fine people. They have rate cards. They'll be happy to help you with this this kind of service. That's what they do for a living. But that's not the point of this particular talk. This particular webinar is about questions like this, and we're going to let Michelle kick this one off. Michelle, why don't you talk to David a little bit?
Sure. So I saw this question, and I wanted to address kind of the premise of the question before I answered the question. I've seen a lot of people that do not build the internet for a living kind of give themselves a little bit of self-shame for not being technical people. And I wanted to say, like Cal said at the beginning, not being a technical person does not mean that there's anything wrong. In fact, that's great, because what we want as developers is people who are very, very passionate and knowledgeable about their business in order to be able to partner with them so that we can bring our knowledge to the table, you can bring your knowledge to the table, and then we can build something awesome, exactly like Cal said. That being said, I think the first step in trying to figure out everything that you need to do to optimize a website is that you're asking this question, and the person that you should be asking is the person that you're working with. That's great. There are places that you can go to get a general kind of verbal knowledge of the types of things you should be asking for. But honestly, I think asking your developer what they would recommend, following their guidelines on, where we should be hosting things, maybe what kind of caching we should be using, how we need to treat our images, how we need to treat how we're loading all of our assets. Maybe we shouldn't be uploading videos directly to our server, stuff like that. Your developer is going to have a lot of insights into that, but I think being able to even have that dialogue in the first place is great, and you're on the right path.
Great answer. Mario, David, got anything else?
Yeah, I'd like to chime in quickly. So I spent the past couple of weeks having conversations with lawyers and accountants in terms of launching some new plugins here, and new products actually, and almost everything I heard from them was incomprehensible, for me at least. So what I'm trying to say is I can absolutely relate with anyone who's been hearing go about, I don't know, maybe WebP or async, deferring, JavaScript, whatever it is, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to understand everything that's required to get your website optimized. Essentially, you have a couple of opportunities that you can take here. The first one is just find someone whom you trust enough and hire them and let them do the work for you, right? The other thing is, if you actually want to get up to date with everything, you simply need to spend quite a lot of time getting up to speed with technology in general, with web servers, with images, and yada, 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 whatnot. So definitely, I mean, if you're trying to be on the second route, don't get discouraged. But also, I mean, keep in mind that the technical landscape is ever shifting and evolving extremely quickly. So even us who are spending about 10 hours a day, give or take, every single day for over a decade, even we are facing challenges in keeping up to speed with everything in our landscape. And we do work with other people in the industry just to complement our own skills. So definitely don't get discouraged, and just know that we have the same problems talking to other experts in different industries, and it's absolutely normal, and it's just the way it is.
Also, it's also important to know. It's also important to know. Just be aware of what you're optimizing for, and see if you can get your, putting in a non-tech speak. You can optimize for a bunch of things, but optimize for the things that are going to get you the most noticeable changes. So you might have someone that comes along and says, "Oh, you need your page to be this fast, or you need to have this element in your site to respond like this." And yes, things do need to be fast. But if you have a website and it's primarily the content or some sort of thing on the website that is more important that you optimize, maybe you want to optimize the user experience, the visual user experience, or maybe how something looks in a certain browser or certain app or something like that. Just be aware that you can't, as much as we would like to optimize all the things, it's important to pick the right things, at least starting with. So that's going to vary for everybody, right? I mean, everybody wants their site to be faster, but that's a given. But there's going to be certain things that you want to focus on first in terms of, what am I going to optimize my website for now? Is it going to bring me some returns relatively soon, or how soon can I see if it's going to bring me returns? So it's not just how fast the page loads, but it's like A/B testing sometimes, a design on a site or landing page to see what gets the most clicks or the traffic or feedback. So just, don't try to optimize everything at once. Pick the key things that you think will have the greatest returns. And that goes for, life in general, but it goes especially for websites too.
Yep. I'm going to wrap this question up with one little thing. We've alluded to it a couple times here, but none of this stuff is free. Okay, these fine people, including myself, all work for a living, and we do this stuff for a living. Now, that having been said, in better times, I've been known to sit down with someone who just has some basic questions over a cup of coffee and answer those questions to the best of my ability. But there's a difference in that advice and the advice that I give somebody that has me on retainer. So, the depth of the advice is the difference. So if you're very serious about this, then yes, you're going to probably end up paying somebody. If you, on the other hand, you've just got a couple questions, go to your most WordPress meetups these days are online. Go hang out, look at who's answering questions in the forums and stuff, and see if you can pick their brain for a little bit and maybe offer them a $10 Amazon gift card or something for their troubles. Something like that will point you in the right direction. But eventually, if you're serious about this and you're not a technical person, you're going to have to bring on a technical person to do most of the in-depth stuff. Okay, let's see. What's our next? Where's my screen? There we are. Okay. Let's see. Mario, I'm going to let you do this one. If you disappear or I want another qualified developer, what documentation do you, and when I say you have a huge team. You've got like 50 people now. What's y'all's best practice to put all of this in place? So if somebody decides, hey, you're no longer working or doing the job for me, I want to go somewhere else, what can people reasonably expect, not only from you, but from what should they expect from their company?
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful question. And first off, we don't disappear. We either stick around for years or we just fire clients. So that's essentially the two possible things that could happen. But aside from that, the documentation and in general, anything that happens besides getting a job done, it's something that has to be agreed upon depending on the type of contract, depending on the billing, and depending on the whole process that occurs between a vendor and the customer, right? I'm going to give you an example. We do have one, like our smallest client is 5 hours per month. And then we have another customer paying for 800 hours a month, right? The difference between the retainers is staggering. And what we do for the second one is completely different from what we do for the first one. So the very same thing goes for one-off projects. Even though we don't do them occasionally, when we do the entire qualification period, when you go through the discovery phase and whatnot, we discuss all those challenges. What are your future plans for this build? Do you plan to take on the ongoing development? Do you plan to hire new people after us? Do you plan to keep us on retainer afterwards? And yada, yada, yada. So based on that, we try to decide on everything that needs to be included so that everyone's happy at the end of the day. And of course, there are some best practices such as maintaining everything in our clients' version control repository on GitHub or Bitbucket, and making sure we have a change log and a bunch of other things so that everything is kept clean and tidy. But for example, documentation isn't something that we necessarily do, or we say, well, within our monthly plan, let's say 40 hours a month, within which generally equates to about 10 hours a week, we have about 10%, which is about an hour a week of project management, which includes documentation, which includes training, which includes everything else. So if you want to play by our handbook, and if you pay for those 40 hours a month, you're going to get this 1 hour a week so that we keep everything tight. If you try to go for, 4 or 5 hours per month maintenance plans, from a technical standpoint, it doesn't really make sense for us to do everything that we do. So yeah, I hope that makes sense, and I'm happy if anyone else tries to explain that a little bit differently.
No, that's a great answer. Michelle, David, got anything to add?
Yeah, well, partly. I'm sorry that, Kat, you feel that you have to ask about your developer disappearing. It sounds like that might be something from experience, and I apologize on behalf of developers that maybe didn't extend a professional relationship towards you. That being said, I work with clients, and I like it when both of us choose to work with each other, but I never want my client to feel like they have to work with me. I always want us both to feel like we're getting something out of it. And if either of us, feels like we need to go into a different direction with the right amount of communication, we're free to do so. Partly that's why I choose to build with WordPress, is because finding another qualified developer that builds on WordPress nowadays is one of the easiest things that you can do. Obviously not completely easy. There are lots of different people in the world, but because it powers so much of the internet, there are so many different people that are building it. So it's easier for the client to be able to find it and hand it off to somebody else or go in a different direction. I also try to build everything to WordPress standards. So if anyone else looks at my code, I also comment my code a lot. I mean, I comment my code so much because I'm writing it for me 6 months from now and I forgot why I did what I did. So I try to write code that is friendly for me to understand later and hopefully for other people to understand. For my client as well, I usually install things like WP101 if they're a client that aren't very familiar with WordPress, some kind of internal documentation tools for how to use the site in general, not necessarily about how to write the code or how to do anything with the project, but I do try to put the training in place for like, here's how you use your site, even if I'm not around. Because I didn't go into this to be a content manager. I didn't go into this to be a gatekeeper. I went in this to enable somebody to be able to do something cool on the internet. And that's what I hope that they'll be able to do, whether I'm there or not.
You said something very important. You talked about documenting your code, and I find that fascinating because so many developers these days feel that, it's code. So if it was hard to write, it should be hard to read. On the other hand, I've taken it too far. Very early in my career, I disagreed with one of my bosses about how something should be done. And so I pasted his entire email into the header of the program to prove that I didn't think this up. Kids, that's what we call a career limiting move. Don't be like Uncle Cal. So
I just call it passive aggressive commenting. It sounds very Midwestern.
David, you had something to add.
Here's some specific advice. So it's not just sometimes you're reassuring the client that you're not, when you disappear, it's not necessarily because there's a bad relationship too. It's like, I always like to tell somebody, well, what if like a bus hit, like what if I got hit by a bus tomorrow? What would you do? Or some days it's, what if I walk in front of a bus? What would, what would you do after I'm gone? Obviously, you want to you want to keep open documentation, sharing with the client to a point where this is kind of what you do. I think some people like to wait. They can comment code, but some people wait until the end to write documentation. Sometimes it makes sense to do it at the end, but sometimes it makes sense to kind of at least write an outline out. So when a developer does take over, after they scrape my remains off the highway, they can probably be able to look at the documentation, look at the code, and kind of get a general idea of where the developer was, which means that, of course, the client should have all the access and everything even before you start the project. And here's one tip I found especially helpful in the last couple of years, something we do internally in EnviroGallery too, that I've applied to one of the few times I do freelancing now, is that record videos. As you build something, record a video and send it to the client, because it does a couple of things. One, it's usually faster than an email, at least for me. Two, it allows you to communicate some intricacies and obviously showing step-by-step in a video better than you could probably in an email. And three, if a customer has a question that, you've answered already, just say, well, just go back and look at the video, and they can pause the video and rewind the video as much as they want. And so do a little crowdcasting, send a video, and you think, oh, wow, that's a lot of time. If you organize all these videos in a folder and you give them decent names, almost like coding something, where give them decent names or put a little in your documentation, like this video included this or something. You don't have to go, you don't have to be, each one doesn't have to be a TED Talk, but I found that to be specific, big help in terms of saving you a bunch of time. And the client is usually happy, because I've never met a client or anyone who says, oh man, another video. If they're going to complain about something, it's listening to my voice. It's not the content of the video. They always appreciate that. So that's just one tip I thought I'd share.
No, that's an excellent tip. Thank you so much for that. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Okay, Michelle, since you talked about the fact that you do UX, and I see the letters UX in this together, I'm going to go ahead and throw this one over to you. How do you take into account SEO, maintainability, UX, performance, and security when you're building the application?
Sure. Well, if the project's big enough, you take it into account by having an entire team working with you, that everyone can specialize in one of those buckets and put it all together to have one big thing of expertise. That being said, generally when I'm building things, I am not a team, I am me, and I have to wear a lot of hats. Mm-hmm. So at a smaller scale, when you're building something that's maybe in the small business or the independent side of things, some of that is built into following good practices of the platform you're building on. Again, in my case, that's WordPress. So, building everything to that spec. Some of that is my own personal education. So I'm very interested in accessibility, which actually also helps with SEO a whole lot. If you build it properly accessible, the search engines also know how to parse it. UX, well, that's what I do. And UX can be anywhere from doing an entire dive of wireframes and user testing and all sorts of things on a big project. But even on a little project, being able to sit down at the beginning and define who are our users, what are their primary and secondary goals? Do you have any information from your current website as to what is or isn't working? Do we have any analytics results we can look at? Should we wireframe a couple things out and prototype it? And also, being able to have like prototype versions of the site as we're going on, where we can start testing different interactions. Like, hey, does this actually work when we build it out? How is this actually loading? A lot of iterative and a lot of back and forth. It's how I'm able to. This is again on the scaled down side, where we're talking about a smaller business or a mid-sized organization that can't afford a whole team to do all of these things individually. There's ways of kind of incorporating that into even smaller projects.
Great answer.
Yeah, that sucked the wind. That sucked the wind out of my sails. I have small sails. But I mean, when you look at the question like that, it just, when you look at all these things that you kind of have to juggle, and I think, before and this probably touches on a little bit of what Michelle said, like, before you start at the beginning of the project, it's so important to lay things out before you design anything, before you code anything, trying to take these things into account. I think was one thing on here that I also thought was missing in that question was accessibility. All of these things, especially accessibility, sometimes are left till it's too late in the project to be able to do. You need a game plan for each one of these. And the thing is that each one of these, everything here is so deep, depending on the project. If you're doing a blog, some of these things are lighter than others. You don't need to go too deep into the matrix. But if you're building a site that has any sort of complexity to it, each one of these can be its own separate rabbit hole. So if you don't know something deep, you find a consultant you can trust. And I think Mario said this earlier, and that takes some networking. So if you're starting off on your own, this is going to be tough. But part of the game here is you need to know people. So if you don't know a lot about SEO, find that SEO person that you can trust and keep them on your list. Michelle's on my list for designers. She has a restraining order against me too, but I'm going to wait. No, that's not right. But that's
we don't talk about
different. No, we're in quarantine. We're not seeing each other in person, so I get a pass. But you need to find like an SEO person, like WordPress. Like, there is minimal amount of SEO with WordPress that you can do to get someone started, right? I mean, there's tutorials, there's best practices, you're coding content correctly. There's even plugins. But once you start getting into certain levels, then you need to have that expert. So need to know where you draw that line. And then once you go past that line, find that person in your industry that's there, because no single person is going to, or even a small group is going to know in depth about each one of things. And then the last thing would be testing too. How do you take all this into account? Well, when you're done with a site, give it a security test, give it an audit. Let people look at the thing as you're building it and give them necessary feedback on user experience, performance. Maintenance can be thought of during the process as well. So plan beforehand, find people you can trust, and then test and confirm things as you get closer to completing your project. Mic drop.
Yeah, to wrap it up, I would say that the way we look at things is we are trying to rank each of those specialties from a 1 to 10 scale. So, for example, we are trying to rank first our skills in each of those specialties, and second, the necessity to invest in each of those areas depending on the current theme employed by the client and depending on the industry as well. Just as a quick example, security is something that most people claim to do, or they set up security or anything else, and everything is running smoothly. However, I've actually led security trainings for CERN, and if anything is going south there, they're probably going to nuke half of Europe. So it's kind of more crucial to do security there than otherwise. I've also led security trainings for Saudi Aramco, which is the largest petrol company in the world, and so forth. So, when you're talking about security, it's one thing to say, I have a blog and it needs to be overall secure. It's a completely different thing to say, I have a $700 trillion business with a lot of competitive intel and probably lots of people investing many billions a year trying to hack this business. The very same thing goes for SEO. I'm fairly, well-versed in SEO. I've been writing content for 15 years now. I've ranked several websites fairly well, including our own agency, pretty much myself. However, I have a lot of people in my network who are in the Forbes top 50 list of marketers worldwide. And they rank, the largest e-commerce websites out there, the largest insurance sites out there, and so forth. So when you're trying to look into this, asking, is my website SEO optimized, or is my website secure? That's not the right type of question. Of course, every expert out there is going to do their best to follow the best practices as best as they can in each of those areas. But as both Michelle and David said, you need an expert or even an army of experts in each of those corresponding areas. Second, your, let's say, development vendor is not necessarily required to cover 10 out of 10 for each of those areas. And third, this is definitely a conversation you have to have at the beginning. In the vast majority of times, we do have other companies dealing with DevOps or sysadministration, which covers the security end. We have a UX or creative studio covering this part of the equation. Or then we have other people dealing with SEO, such as a separate content marketing or PR agency or whatever it is. So again, keep that in mind. If this is a concern of yours, definitely bring it up as early as possible. There is a possibility that the agency or the vendor can help you to some extent, so try to gauge this. But definitely, if you're trying to aim for the stars, you're going to have to hire top talent for each of those corresponding areas.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. Hey, I want to add one little thing, since the word performance is in here. If you are modifying an existing site, please go out and do a performance measurement before you make any changes. Get a baseline of this is where we're at now. That way, when you've made the changes, you can make another run and say, okay, did we make it better? Did we make it worse? So many people just say, hey, we're going to speed up our website. They start making changes, and then they say, well, is it better? Well, we don't know. We didn't measure beforehand. So please take a measurement before you start the process. Okay, next question. Why is a maintenance contract required before signing a web development contract? And Mario, I think I have you set for this one. Why don't you talk to us? Because you deal with some large clients, and I know you deal with a lot of maintenance contracts and contracts in general. So talk to us about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the most common questions, because 95% of our business is actually based on retainers and based on recurring revenue. And we always discuss ongoing work for any project that comes in, regardless of whether it starts as a retainer or it's a completely new project or a migration or rebuild or whatever. The very first thing that comes to mind is either, oh, I don't need a maintenance, or no, this is precisely the reason we're working together, because there's no way we are going to work together without maintenance. They're very contrasting, very polarizing opinions, and this is one of the most common things we hear pretty much on a daily basis. So what I'm trying to say here is technology evolves really rapidly, and it's very likely that your project, whatever you need, if you're trying to aim for any business development whatsoever, or any business growth, or any scalability that's based on your digital presence through your project, you're most likely going to need maintenance as a part of the contract. And again, a good chunk of the vendors out there are going to include either mandatory or highly recommended maintenance plan at the very least as a continuation to your project. It's extremely common, and I'm going to mention WordPress first off because many of us here on the panel are WordPress experts, and second because WordPress currently powers about 38% or so of the web, so basically every third website or so. WordPress, as an example, is a very robust platform. However, it's comprised of the WordPress core and plugins and themes and PHP and the web server and MySQL or MariaDB, which is essentially your database server. And then you have a Linux container with or Windows or whatever it is that needs to be kept up to date. And you have some modules that need to process images or optimize some stuff or handle SSL, which is your secure website. Then you probably have a CDN, which is a third-party thing. And then you probably have, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And all of those components are getting updated every few days or so on average. So if you leave your project unattended for a month or so, it's likely that something's going to go south, or you're going to be exposed to a potential security vulnerability, which is going to be pretty problematic. On top of that, most projects include specific components or areas that are dependent on third parties. You may be connecting to a CRM, to a marketing automation software, to an ERP. Maybe you embed your Instagram feed, which is dependent on a token that gets renewed or not and may expire, or something may go out there as well. Cloudflare, which is pretty large and massive in terms of web application firewall, was down for like 5 hours last week. And if nobody's there to actually take care of this and potentially just disable it for a while so that your website gets loaded, you're going to have reduced uptime as a result. So again, I can keep going on for hours, but there are so many moving pieces.
Oh no, you can't.
Yeah,
you can't. I have to spend. My wife is forcing me to spend time with my family in an hour. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mario.
Stop me right there, David. Let me know what I'm missing. But yeah, in a nutshell, before I pass the ball to you, again, there's so many moving pieces in development, in essentially bringing a project to life, that it simply requires ongoing maintenance. And I often give cars as an analogy here, right? You don't buy the latest Porsche or Bugatti or whatever it is and leave it unattended for 6 months only to have such a massive crash that your car is practically useless, instead of spending the bare minimum just to keep it up to speed, on a monthly basis, or at least every quarter.
I apologize, Mario. I should have interrupted you. Due to the pandemic, I'm not getting my medication on a regular basis.
No, it's the kids. I'm pretty sure that it's pretty tough. You have 3 or 4 kids. Remind me again.
Well, 3 that I know of.
Mario, you bring in a very interesting perspective to this entire conversation. That's why I invited you to be on this discussion, because I know you have a very wide range of clients, but you've got some very large ones. I know David and Michelle don't deal with small clients, but they deal more in the small to medium business size, the SMBs. David, Michelle, do you have anything to add to what Mario is saying? Michelle, you're shaking your head. Go first.
Yeah. So I do not require a maintenance contract in order to do web development with me, but I do highly encourage it. The reason being, I don't want to make people feel like they have to stay with me. I do feel like they should be getting maintenance from somebody, but I am only going to guarantee my work for a very short, certain amount of time after launch, a certain amount of, weeks or so afterward. If there's any bugs, if there's anything that might need an update or questions they want answered right away, I'm happy to do so. That's part of the customer service process. But a website, especially any kind of dynamic website that's built, on any kind of content management system platform, with all the moving pieces exactly that we just heard about, is not a static thing. It is a living thing. Something is going to need updating. Something is going to need changing. Somebody's going to change their API. Somebody's going to change their parameters. A host is going to want to update PHP. Like, something's going to happen, and you're going to need to update it. And I am happy to, provide a maintenance contract or direct them to a company that specializes in maintenance contracts. There are several people that just do that, and that might be the level of service that they need. Or I am happy in a year to come back, and you will pay me a lot of money to get everything caught back up, fix all of the things. And it'll probably cost you a whole lot more than just like, ramming your car into a tree probably costs a whole lot more than getting your oil changed every X amount of miles, right? That's a great analogy. If your engine seizes up because you literally never change the oil, it costs a lot more to get a new engine. So I very much agree with that analogy. But maintenance is going to be necessary, and either you as a site owner are going to figure out how to do it yourself, or you are going to work with your development company or another company to maintain your site. You just don't have a choice.
Yeah, I think it's also important, and this has been said, just to make sure upfront, even before you start the project, that this is not like having, well, no, wait, this is like having kids. Sorry. It's like you can't just have them and then forget about them. I tried, it doesn't work. So, or the state doesn't allow you to do it. So you realize, and it's kind of important to kind of like, as you build the site, again, this depends on how complex the site is, but start to coax. I don't require maintenance contract when I start a project, because I may not like that client at the end of it. No marriage jokes, but so what I do is, what I do that I as I go through the process, if there's particular parts of the project that, like, we're building some custom component or something that requires external APIs, I just make sure to make that very clear to the customer or the client or whoever it is I'm working with, that says, listen, this is something that you're going to have to watch after the project is concluded. And because we've already gone over best practices and documentation and all of that, it's going to be very comfortable with the fact that, you're not holding a live grenade as much as some other analogy I can't think of right now that's less dangerous. So they're going to be comfortable with that fact. So they won't be surprised when not only is it going to need maintenance, but how often and what level of maintenance and how much it's going to cost. So that may require you to change your tactics before you even develop something, even though you agreed to it in the proposal. Somebody, you may realize, and let's be honest, we don't realize I have everything 100% before we start a project. That's a dream. That never happens in real life. That's just some things you figure out as you go along. No marriage jokes. So I want that you have to make sure the customer is comfortable with that, and they realize what the pain points are and what is going to require that additional maintenance, whether you do it or not. So they're not going to be surprised when, it also helps if they start maintaining, updating their own plugins, but, as if they can't do it on that level, if they understand, then there's great maintenance companies out there specific to WordPress, then they can join up for. That's why they exist.
Yep. No, that's very good. It basically comes down to what's the point of your website. I mean, I've got my personal blog. My personal blog does not need a maintenance contract, because if it goes away tomorrow, I'll just call mom and talk to her directly instead of writing on my blog. It's about it. But on the other hand, if you're making money off of this, and there is the possibility that something's going to go down at 2 a.m. and it's going to start costing you money, yeah, maintenance contract's important, because I guarantee you there's not a single person on here that would not charge you extra to get out of bed at 2 a.m. and handle something unless you had a maintenance contract with us already. So it's just a matter of your priorities. And if you're making money off your website, then it's a priority, and you're going to want to make sure that it is taken care of.
And also make sure your response times are clearly stated.
Oh yeah.
And try to make your hosting company your first and primary place to go to for major issues. If a site goes down, they need to call them, and they need to know who to contact, and not call you at 2 a.m. Make sure they call the hosting company if that is what they can do.
Yep. That's excellent. And as I like to tell everybody, I no longer deal with hosting companies. I have hosting partners, okay, because they are so integral to my websites that I can't really consider them just vendors anymore. I deal with hosting partners. Can you guess which one's my favorite? No. Okay.
I don't want to guess wrongly.
Okay. Let's see. I received different quotes from different editing experiences. What's the difference? Since I don't understand this one, I'm just going to let David take it. I don't know what an editing experience is.
That bus I was talking about earlier?
I do believe this is, using, let's say, Visual Composer versus Gutenberg versus static HTML versus page templates versus widget areas versus yada, yada, yada. That's
Yep.
Oh, so this is somebody who's wanting a site being built.
Yeah,
And
I feel so, yeah.
well, I mean, my quick thought on this is, have them explain the difference to you. Why is the editor they're picking the best solution? Because and at the end of the day, you have to be comfortable with whatever they hand to you. So see if you can get a little bit of a demo in terms of what it's like, if it is using a page builder, or excuse me, not a page builder. He says a different editor. So I mean, technically, Gutenberg can fall under this, whether you're using Gutenberg or not, or you're using Elementor, Beaver Builder. I was about to say Beaver Baker, but no, those are two. I was combining two different editors put together. But what's the difference? Have them explain it to you. And if they can't reasonably explain it to you, and if their best explanation is it's something that we use all the time, that's not the greatest explanation. And realize that some people might be pushing an editor to you just because they pump out Elementor sites, which is nothing wrong with that. But just kind of understand that, okay, if all you do is pump out Elementor sites and you're pushing Elementor to me as a solution, then what does it look like after you are completed with the project? Is this something I can handle? And you get get a handle on that. Don't wait until they're done. And assuming they even give you documentation, well, don't wait. That's too late to be able to figure out that you're comfortable with this. So the difference is just and how the builders are put together. At the end of the day, they should be able to give you a good explanation and a good demo of that.
Yep.
Yeah. So one of the things that was touched on in general, I have heard the question a lot, why are different developers quoting me different prices for the same project, right? Why is that happening? And I think being able to talk through what exactly the developer is quoting you for. First of all, do they understand the actual scope of the project? Can they explain back to you where the number came from? Even if two developers will build you the thing that looks pretty much exactly the same for your end user, how about your experience as a site builder? What are they thinking about there? That's something that's very important to me. Because again, I don't want to be the gatekeeper of your content. What I want to do is not only build a website that your end user can use to do what they want to do, I want to make it easy for you to do what you want to do. And some people aren't necessarily thinking about the site editor, the administrator experience. So they might be using a very complex solution with content in all kinds of different places. That might be a reason why they'll be able to build it a little bit cheaper, is because while the front end of the site will look beautiful, it'll be very hard for you to use. And so you can ask them questions about, the stuff we've talked about in previous slides about making sure things are accessible and optimized and performant and whatever on the front end is one question, and it's important, but also what is it going to be like for you, the site manager, to manage the site? That is something that can also influence price. I think it's something that's probably worth a premium if you want to actually be able to maintain your site in the future.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be quick here. Essentially, again, there are lots of different options to manage your website. And again, especially in the context of popular content management systems such as WordPress, there are gazillion ways to build even your front end itself and just to manage your content and whatnot. And receiving different quotes is more than normal. What David mentioned, that Elementor agencies only building Elementor websites, they're highly skilled at this and it's going to be cheap, but if you don't need Elementor, it's going to be a problem, is a really common scenario. And it's something that you definitely need, you definitely need some help with analyzing what exactly you need, or you need to reach out to multiple agencies, or best case scenario, you need a partner whom you can trust, someone who's recommended or someone you figure out can do whatever you need, and just talk this through with them. Just have multiple discussions and say, okay, like I'm trying to figure out, like as we had a question already for luddites who are trying to understand performance or optimization. It's a similar thing here. We're trying to figure out what goes into a project. I'm a really big proponent on having longer pre-sale cycles. It's the best thing that could happen to a vendor, just having a longer pre-sale cycle. And trust me, I'm saying it as someone who signed up a project after over a year of negotiations. Maybe I have a longer one, but this is something that we started recently. So it's really better to just figure out what goes into the project, break the details down, and try to set up a streamlined process that goes through everything that's included or excluded. Something that we have in our clauses, in our contracts, is we're going to do this, and of course there is a maintenance plan and yada yada. But having said that we're going to do this means that whatever you see included and whatever comes, for example, with WordPress as a core CMS is what you're going to get. No assumptions whatsoever. No other perks that you may be believing are going to be included. No, nothing, because everything is up for interpretation. And there's so many ways to build a website. And there is so many ways, and I'm really happy for the previous questions, actually, like, is SEO included? Is UX included? Is accessibility included? Is optimization included? Or performance, or scalability, or this or that, or this or that? Like, we're going to list down what's included. And don't assume that anything else is. And if it's unclear, of course, you're going to talk this through, but it's pretty much a, take it or leave it offer. So if you go through multiple agencies, you're most likely going to take different quotes, but vendors, and I'm not talking, predominantly for agencies or freelancers, but vendors saying, yeah, I'm going to build this website, it's going to cost 5K or 10K or 20K or so, without actually doing this breakdown, they're probably going to cut corners if you're charging low. And it's something that you have to be prepared for.
Great answer. Great answer. I'm not even going to try to add anything to that because y'all have given just such wonderful answers. Let's move on to the next one. And I believe this will probably be the last of the official questions, even though we've got some more. But this one should take us right up to the 5 minutes till. But I like this question. While most of us love WordPress's plugin architecture, it causes undue latency on the website and the user browser experience. What strategies do you recommend to troubleshoot in an attempt to eliminate this strategy? I'm going to start this off by saying it's not necessarily true that a plugin will cause a slowdown. They do in a lot of cases, but it's not a given. But one of my favorite ones, and this is as a developer, one of my favorite strategies is to make sure that I have all the proper caching in place. And I'm talking about programmatic caching, not caching of images or CDN or stuff like that. But on the back end, make sure that my web server is doing everything it can to keep all of, or as much of WordPress in memory and cached and ready to go as possible. PHP has this functionality built in, and your developer should be able to help you turn it on. If you are a developer, go look in the php.ini for the op cache settings, and you can manipulate that. Also, SiteGround has a plugin that just helps with this stuff. So, and it makes an incredible difference in turning that on and off. I know because I've got some very intensive websites that I host with them, and I've done the math. I've turned it on and turned it off. So, but there's also some other good ones out there that basically help you configure your backend server and your PHP. That's my favorite one. But I'll throw this out to the panel. What are y'all's strategies?
Well, the plugins, I mean, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about blaming it on the plugin architecture. I think I've seen some. I think there's a valid point saying that you can hook into some, depending on what your plugin does, right? Because this could be almost anything. But generally speaking, if you are a developer and you hook into the wrong place at the wrong time in the plugin architecture, then yeah, I can see why that would be a sore spot. But overall, if you add more complexity and operations to a website, the more latency you're going to get. And it doesn't matter whether you're using WordPress's plugin architecture or not. So Cal, you're caching. I mean, I'm again stating overall here, WordPress does have its certain issues too. I mean, WP Cron's one of them in terms of things, but I mean, overall, the architecture I don't think is really to blame. I think probably there could be better documentation, better education, and better overall in terms of just the problems I have seen, 80%, 90% of the problems I've seen when dealing with latency and plugins has just been bad selection of where the plugins insert. Sometimes the plugins aren't needed on certain pages and certain operations, so they don't even need to be loaded. Especially after PHP 7, things load incredibly fast. I remember in the early days of PHP, boy, you didn't want to load even some conditional statements in some regards because it would take, you were counting the milliseconds there. But these days, it's like if a plugin doesn't see a page being loaded, just don't load the rest of the plugin, be selective. And that just comes down to developers being smart. So the strategy in that case to troubleshoot is a little, I think how caching as far as troubleshooting goes a long way. The more static you can get a page, the better. But again, it just comes down to sometimes plugins just aren't very well written. Sometimes not to the fault of the developer, but sometimes it is.
Let me tag on to that and say bad code knows no framework or no language. Okay, it's developers can write bad code in any language and for any platform. Okay, so it's not. This is not specific to WordPress, but and my answer was generic to PHP. Michelle, Mario, y'all got advice?
Yeah, I mean, so when it comes to latency or any type of performance challenges, as we've been working with lots of high-scale projects, I'm generating, close to 1 billion page views a month or so. It really depends on what sort of project we're talking about and what sort of angles are being attacked the most heavily. So, for example, we have some publisher websites that get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories a day published in the database. Then we have some other websites that get a single post that generates, let's say, 25 to 30 million page views on that single post alone, right? So those are two completely different scenarios. In the first case, we have a bloated database with tons of stories and so forth. So we do need some denormalization, or we do need some extra tables, and we do need better indexing and whatnot. In the second case, we do need better page caching, we do need better CDNs, we do need better image compression because there's a lot of traffic hitting, a large image or video or so forth. Or maybe if there's a video, we need transcoding, and the list goes on. If you have an API, you may get some timeouts that basically freeze the page for 30 seconds or so. So yeah, in that specific case, WordPress, of course, there is some overhead that comes with WordPress as a CMS in terms of general things that are required to support the platform. Like you get, 15 to 20 database queries on the most simple backend pages, such as the tools page. There are maybe a little bit too many, and a bunch of other things. But in the grand scheme of things, as Kyle said, bad code knows no framework or so. I'm kind of paraphrasing because my my memory lasts just as much. But yeah, the plugin architecture itself is pretty much okay, especially if you treat it as the Unix tool system. Building one specific small thing that solves one particular problem, and it could be as independent as possible, as coherent as possible, and as detachable as possible. Then it doesn't really matter whether you have hundreds of thousands of plugins, I'm over exaggerating, or not, because everything is going to solve one little very specific problem, and it's going to be easier to isolate it and load it on a very specific page in a very specific scenario, and so on and so on. So yeah, it's mostly about development skills. It's mostly about context. It's mostly about speed of execution as well, because a good chunk of the poorly written code I've seen from expert developers is emergency cowboy coding last minute due to outages and due to clients trying to get stuff as quickly as possible with no overhead, leading to a lot of technical debt. So you always need to take a look at each side of the table.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to add, so WordPress has gotten bad press for being slow or insecure or whatever, and part of the reason is because WordPress has a low barrier to entry for creation as well as for development. It's great because it means that so many people that didn't go to school for development or can start building something. That's amazing. The downside of that is that anything kind of goes. So if it works, it ships, and it may not be the most optimized thing or the best performant thing or the most well-written thing. There are strict coding standards you can follow, but you don't have to follow them just to build something that works. So I think that's part of the problem. As has been said, not all code is created equal. when I talk to people kind of on the smaller end of things, right? So we're not talking about large scale architecture, but you've seen small websites that just drag the browser down. Like for some reason, like some person's personal blog is taking 10 seconds to load and it's just loading a million things. And it's the thing I tell my clients is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. The more complexity you introduce, like was being said, the more it's going to impact performance, the more it's going to impact, what has to be loaded on any given page. So be very, very purposeful about where you're introducing complexity, where you're like, because it's cool is probably not a good reason, unless there's like some trade-off you can make somewhere else. Like, I'm willing to have something be cool, and it's totally fine if everyone abandons my website before it loads because it takes 10 seconds to load. That's a choice you can make. And maybe for your personal blog that your mom only reads, like she'll be patient and she will wait those 10 seconds and it'll be okay.
Excellent. Great answers. Okay.
Be patient.
Yeah. That happens so much. We're going to have to skip that one and that one. I really hope to get to the what skills does it take to be a full stack developer, but we're not going to be able to do that one. This brings us to the portion of the program that I like to call One Thing. This is the chance for our panelists to shine and to tell you a little more about themselves, the services they offer. So we're going to start it off with Mario. Mario, tell us the one thing you want to talk about.
Well, what I want to say is one of the businesses we work with, and they're scaling pretty fast, called NitroPack, is a great solution I've been working with lately and penetrating the WordPress space as well. It's not a performance/caching plugin. It's something really cool that works in a similar fashion to Cloudflare for optimizing web performance and whatnot, but specifically, tailored to website speed. The reason I like them so much lately, and that's the reason why I've been working with them closely to try to help them scale further, is they do have a very, very decent page website speed tester on their own homepage. So you can, type in nitropack.io, type your website in and see what your current Lighthouse page speed scores are and what the score would be once you set the plugin up. There's a freemium version to about, 5,000 page views a month or so. And of course, there are more expensive plans further, but it's not a plugin. It's not something you have to take care of in terms of updates, in terms of bloated code base, in terms of the plugin architecture, some of the things we mentioned. It's a third-party software as a service that you connect to WordPress, and it just works. So for anyone who's worried about this, who doesn't have the budget to actually, hire a developer, even though all of us on the panel here are, it may be a quick workaround to get up to speed in a, direct and indirect manner, and also optimize your SEO results due to a fast loading website as well. So that's kind of the thing I'm recently most excited about talking with.
Excellent. Who's next? Michelle, talk to us. What's your one thing?
Hey, you're muted, I think, Michelle.
You're muted, Michelle. You're back.
Okay. Yeah, no, I click on the button and then it just like remutes itself because it's like, no, you talked enough. You're done. Please stop. Okay, so I know one of the questions we didn't get to was questions about, how to become a full stack developer. And there's also been a lot of questions in the chat about, I'm just getting started. I want to learn more about code. How do I do XYZ? First of all, I do want to say, I didn't, go to school for development, although I have been doing development kind of on a personal level since I was a kid. Not to a large extent, but like enough that it was around me. But the biggest thing that I did in order to get into this field is to kind of surround myself with very smart people and attend things like this. Back in the before times, attending things like WordCamps and meetups, but kind of being around the community is extremely important. So if you're very interested in learning how to be a better developer, there are plenty of online courses for that. But the biggest resource you can have is other people and getting to know them, because you can learn the basics from an online course, but it's amazing to be able to put out on Twitter like, hey, I am having a problem with XYZ, and having a couple really smart people reply to you and be able to help you fix it is great. So if that's what you're serious about, get involved in your local developer community and do that.
Excellent. Thank you. David, what's your one thing?
I'm feeling embarrassed because I had a self-promotional thing going on here, and everybody here is recommending these awesome things that the community should do, and I feel like a jackass now. So let me rethink a little bit. Yeah, there is a lot of stuff happening in the WordPress community in terms of what conferences, virtual and otherwise, are going to be looking like. I still think meetups are still a pretty good alternative if you can find. The great thing now is if there's not a meetup in your geographical area, you can literally find any meetup anywhere and join it now. So if you go to meetup.com, you can actually look for those. I run a South Florida WordPress meetup group, and actually starting, I think we're going to probably join another meetup group in August, but September we're planning on a mega meetup group. So we're going to combine a couple, like there's no reason anymore why meetup groups have to be a certain size or a certain geographical location. And another idea we're also planning possibly for September is there is no giant developer group for WordPress, meetup wise, that is, and a meetup level. So if anybody's interested in any of those things, feel free to let me know. One of the things that I've been most impressed with, somebody was asking about page builders in the chat. And I'm all for page builders, but, and this comes the personal plug. My wife is a school teacher, and she's quickly now wanting to pivot away from teaching physically in a classroom to being able to offer courses online and tutoring online, especially in math and physics. So she and my 15-year-old daughter, Cal, who you know, Olivia, they were able to put together through WooCommerce, LearnDash, and Gutenberg a site in less than 2 weeks. And if anybody wants to give any feedback on it, it's called accelerateedu.com. But just the fact that you could not do that even with a WordPress site a couple of years ago just shows you what potential now WordPress has for the upcoming generation of people. WordPress's market share too has also skyrocketed in the last 4 months. I believe it's gone up 3%, if I'm guessing. That is huge, probably due to current world conditions. So just remember that some people, when they hear about WordPress or PHP or whatever, they have this idea, they think of something that probably needs to be updated in their minds. And WordPress is not the solution for everything, but go to a meetup, support those, take another look at the new WordPress blocks that are being distributed, and see if that still can apply to you in what you're doing. So at least support the community and make sure that your knowledge of WordPress is more or less up to date and generally, and then WordPress, especially with WordPress 5.5 coming out next month.
Excellent. And I'm going to wrap this whole thing up with my one thing. And David, do not feel ashamed. Mine is going to be quasi self-promotional. I'm going to talk about my favorite web host and my favorite web partner. And that would, of course, or hosting partner, and that would, of course, be SiteGround. I love SiteGround. It has very little to do with the fact that every Christmas they send me something wonderful. It has very little to do with the fact that this past Christmas they gave me this absolutely gorgeous ski jacket, and I live in West Palm Beach, Florida, and even with the air conditioner on, I can't wear this thing. So,
thank you, SiteGround.
But it is a beautiful gift. I love SiteGround because every time I turn around, they're looking for ways to not only find ways to help me, to help their customers, but they invest in the PHP community, and the PHP community is very important to me. And I just appreciate any company that stands up and they help sponsor conferences. They help send people to conferences. I really appreciate it. I'm also lucky enough to know some of their developers, so I get an inside peek at what's coming up. And I got to tell you, I'm excited about some of the things that they are working on, and it's just going to get better. So if you are not currently a SiteGround customer, please take a look at them. They have some great tools. Also, I will say this: I work with them on a podcast called the Geek to English Podcast. You can find it at geek2englishpodcast.com. If you like this webinar and you like technical detail or technical concepts talked about in plain English language, then please subscribe to the podcast. That's it. That's all we've got. Hey, I hope you have found this to be a valuable investment of your time. I hope to see you here next month. And with that, I'm going to throw it back over to Ilya.
Thank you, Cal, Michelle, David, Mario, for answering so many questions. That was super useful and informative, and it was really a pleasure to have you. And thanks to all the attendees who watched the webinar. As we promised, we will send you the recording to the email you used to register. And I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you at our next webinar. Have a great day. Bye.
Stay safe. Adios.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.